All right, so now that you're going to be shooting in manual mode, you're probably wondering, where do I start? How do I choose my settings? Just remember, you're always going to be balancing the big three between aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And so we came up with this acronym for you guys, P.C.C, prioritize, compensate, and capture. So it all depends what you're going to be shooting and the type of photograph that you're visualizing. For instance, if motion is the most important thing to you in that photograph, then you want to prioritize shutter speed, and then you compensate aperture, and then you adjust your ISO. Now, if you're more concerned about depth of field, so the amount of things that will be in focus, for instance, if you are shooting a big group of people and they're kind of stacked and you want to make sure that everyone is in focus, you really want to make sure that you have a high f-stop number like F9, F16, so everybody will be in focus. So you start with your aperture, and then you adjust your shutter speed accordingly. And then if you have to, you adjust your ISO. Remember that ISO is always the last thing that we adjust. If we can have a low ISO number, we want to keep it there. But if we have to, we can boost it up. But we always start with our aperture or our shutter speed, and then ISO always comes last. All right, guys, so we wanted to give you an example of prioritizing shutter speed. So here we're going to have Zach and Danny walk towards us holding hands, and we want to freeze that motion. So I'm prioritizing my shutter speed, so I'm going to go ahead and set that at 1/2000th of a second. So I know that's fast enough to stop the motion that's happening in the photo. So to compensate for that, I'm going to open up my aperture to f2. I'm also doing that because I want the background to be out of focus, and so at f2 I have a really shallow depth of field. The last thing is my ISO. So ISO is going to be set at 500. There's a good amount of light out here, so it's not really dark, so I can kind of keep that ISO pretty low. And also, since I'm shooting portraits, I want to retain that quality that I need in case I order a big print. All right, now when you're shooting motion, a big issue is always focusing. So there's two ways to do this. I always recommend using spot focusing. So what I'm going to do is actually put that spot on Zach's face as they're walking towards me, and I'm constantly going to be refocusing on that. So another option is to shoot on continuous focus here, so you can kind of let the camera do that work for you. But I like to have a little more control myself, and so that's what I'll be doing in this instance. All right, I'm going to have them walk towards us and take some photos so you guys can see how my settings allow me to stop that motion. Yes. All right, so we're going to be prioritizing aperture in this video. So I have my aperture set at f1.6. To compensate for that, I'm going to set my shutter speed at 1/1000th of a second, and my ISO is at 320 because I'm letting so much light in with that aperture. I went ahead and cranked that down to make it more dense so that light will be absorbed slowly. All right, so we're going to take a photo and see what we get. All right, so the image is a little bright, it's a little overexposed, so I'm going to have to actually increase my shutter speed a little more to compensate for having that aperture so wide open. So let's take another shot and see what it looks like. Great. All right, so for that shot, I boosted my shutter speed up to 1/2000th of a second, so that restricted the amount of light that was coming in the lens and compensated for that low f-stop number. So remember, whenever you have a super low f-stop like 1.4, f2, 2.8, you're going to have to increase your shutter speed because so much light is going to be coming into your camera.